So I want to talk about the process of the production of history. I think this is an important thing to think about as we continue this whole class, okay? And if you're in my US history class, if you're in my world history class, or any of my history classes, this is a concept that goes across the board to any of the subfields of history. And that is the idea of how history is produced. I think it's important to understand that with the production of history, producing a text of history, it's important to see that it is, in fact, a lot of cases subjective. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about history and the output of history, which is maybe a book or an article or a textbook, like the one we're using in our class, how did it get to that stage? Well, there's a process. First off, an event happens, right? So the actual event, and in that event is all the information that is produced from it. So if you look at, for example, World War II in general, there's all kinds of evidence from that, right? There's written sources, there's artifacts, we still have first-hand accounts of people telling their story. We have pictures, we have even video, we have film. We have all these things, and that is put into and collected, right? And that's put into what we call archives. Here I am in an archive. This is the Exeter Cathedral archive. In front of me here is a medieval manuscript. And this is evidence. If I looked at this, I could see a certain story of when it was written. This is a medical book of the time. So what would I be able to get out of this if I looked at this and explored it? Well, I could sort of see what some of the medical practices might have been and some of the views. I could see, well, how the writing is and how it's written on parchment, animal skin, the different colors in the ink, that it's written in Latin. All these things could tell a certain story by looking at this artifact. All these artifacts tell a story. But there's an important thing about that. This is where it gets subjective. You have all these artifacts and all these things put into archives. And then what happens? You have someone come in like me that looks at them, right? Or you look at them. And from that, you determine what you're going to use. If you're going to use this artifact or that artifact, look at this story, or this film or this clip. Or if it's a history class, what to be using in the class, right? So there's a choice that happens. So in an original thing, when you're trying to write an original story, a history story, and you're looking at something, you pick and choose what you're going to use, what gives the most evidence. And then what do? Well, you write about it. So you write about it and you explain it. You explain what you're seeing and trying to show the truth, right? You're trying to show what really happened. But it's through the person who's doing the artifacts, who's looking at the stuff, it's through their worldview, it's through their ideals, it's through how they interpret it, what they see of it, or the technology to look at it, right? So there's an aspect there, it's written out. Then that's put into academic journals, so other people, peers, professionals in the field can say, yes, that's correct, or that needs a little work there, or that doesn't compare and doesn't look at this sort of aspect. So people talk and collaborate and look at it. From there, then it is put into a book, right? So then it is published into a book. And then it takes about 30 years before all that new information is an interpretation of whatever the facts or artifacts are, to be made it into a textbook. And that's your textbook there. So there's a long process before, when you first interpret something, look at something, write about it, explore it, put it into a book, it's looked at, and then that information makes it to a textbook. So there's a long process there. And in each stage, there's choices made of what is relevant and what is not. There's choices there based on worldviews of how you look at certain things. And that's why it's always changing. So sometimes in your classes, including this one, you might hear professors, instructors say, oh, that's an old textbook. It needs to be updated. Or there's this is a new textbook with new information. Well, why is there new information when the historical events haven't changed? Well, it's not that historical events have changed in any way, but interpretations constantly change, don't they? The way we view ourselves, the way we view the world around us, and the way we view the past is all subjective. It's all based on the worldviews, the glasses that we see through. And I think that's a really important part in any class that you're in that deals with humanities. And I think that's really important. And that's why I want you to know that right off the bat, that developing this class, and in the short amount of time we have, I have to choose what can I tell you in 5-6 weeks, in 19 weeks with the bigger classes, to really tell the story. But there's a subjective nature to that because I am choosing what to produce, right? What to show you. Just like a textbook is choosing what to put in the textbook, just like a book is choosing what to put in a book, a documentary chooses to put in a documentary, things are left out. And those are called silences of history. A major theme in all my history classes is for you to think, okay, this is an awesome story, this is an important perspective maybe. I might agree or disagree, but even beyond all that is what is silenced, what has been dropped from the history books, what has not been told, whose perspective are we missing here, and how can you illuminate that? How can you show what's going on by those silences? That's what we do in history. And if we look at it that way, it's much different than for you to memorize dates or to memorize names, right? It's to see why is this important? And if it is important, whose story are we hearing? And what other stories can we hear? So when looking at U.S. history, what is the general story you're always told? That's okay, that's important, but what other stories around that are relevant and important? What other voices can we hear? Who unsung heroes stories play a major role that we haven't heard before? In world history, same sort of thing. How do we look at the world around us today based on information of how we look at the past? And how has history been used as a powerful tool to shape ideologies, to shape identities, to shape the way people act and interact, and to create the view of what others are like and in themselves? Those are all things that is much beyond just looking at dates and names and all that stuff. And that's why I want you to explore that. I want you to be questioning what is seen as truth in history books, and because of looking at the subjective nature of it. That's why discussion is so important in our classes, because with everybody's view and worldviews and values, you have a background that's different than everyone else in your class. The values that you hold dear might interpret some information differently. And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And it makes our class so much richer. So if you hear someone's perspective about something in discussion and you think that is completely wrong, take a step back and think, well, that is their perspective. Where are they coming from on that? And why does mine differ? And that part you can engage in a lively debate and academic debate and use critical thinking to put forth evidence that you think is important and the way that you are interpreting it, and see how other people in your small group or your instructor interacts with that. And that is cool. It is completely okay. If you're respectful and do it in a respectful manner, that is where history is engaging in live. If you have questions about that, let me know. If you want to talk more about that, I love talking about this stuff, and it makes it fun. It makes it much more alive, and it makes it hopefully applicable in other areas of your life.